This episode contains specific and graphic information about a crime. Please be advised.
That cyberbullying just crushed him, and he thought he had no hope. He thought we could not make it stop. We were trying everything that we possibly could. Even his classmates that knew it was occurring were trying to make it stop. And it was the final match on a huge bonfire that just exploded in our home, and David lost hope.
Welcome to True Crime Prevention, the podcast that melds true crime with real solutions. Let's expose how all crime starts the same way, with a chance. Today, we won't give it a chance. I'm Paul DelPonte, and I work with McGruff, the crime dog. Thank you for joining us. And we welcome today Maurine Molak from San Antonio, Texas. Maurine has both a tragic story of her son's loss, as well as what we like to believe is a hopeful message. As I said, all crime starts the same way, with a chance. And today, with unregulated social media and society's attitudes about social media, we are giving criminals too big a chance. And her story and David's story, her son, will start to highlight that. So we want to both get into how these crimes happen, what happened to David, as well as get at some of the solutions. Maurine, I think, first of all, David, as I understand, loved basketball. He was a joy to be around and things like that. So before we get into the bad stuff, tell us a bit about David and the happy memories.
Oh, yes. Lots of great happy memories. David was the youngest of three brothers. There was about a 6-year gap between my middle son and David. Yeah, David was born in 1999. And so he grew up during the early 2000s when technology was really starting to infiltrate the home. And, we started off in the family where we had the dial-up modem when the boys were young, up until they were high-speed internet and online gaming. And so during that period of his short 16 years of life, he really saw a lot of the technology changes. And we saw lots of changes in his behavior as he got older and he became addicted to social media and online gaming. And you said it well, he was a basketball player, and yeah, he had balance in his life growing up. And so we were never really that concerned about his technology use up until when he had an accident in basketball. He had a very serious injury. And that's when we started to see a real change in his behavior.
And the change in his behavior did something besides the accident, but was there something else that began the downward slide, or did it really happen because of social media and when he got into the online world more?
Yeah, so while he was rehabbing, he turned to social media and online gaming to fill that void. He didn't have that social connection.
And that was rehab from the sports injury, right?
Yeah, from the sports injury. And it was a serious injury, and it lingered on and on and on. He re-injured it. But over a period of probably about 8-9 months. But let me just back up for just 1 second, because
Sure.
Like I said, he grew up in that age of technology. And so he spent a lot of time playing games with his brothers. But because he had balance in his life, we really weren't too concerned about his online use. We always kind of thought in the back of our minds, he had more of a desire to play a lot more than his other brothers did. And we just attributed that to his personality. But when he had that basketball injury and he did turn to social media and online gaming, after about 8-9 months, we started to see a dramatic change in his behavior. And he started to show all the signs of a behavioral addiction. From lying about completing his schoolwork, he was sneaking around using his devices when they were supposed to be locked up and charged downstairs. He was angry and aggressive when we would try to get him to stop playing the games or stop using social media. And then there towards the end, he started stealing from us, using our credit cards without our authorization in order to purchase virtual assets to increase his player power through some of these online gaming platforms. And when I would try to shut things down from the credit card company, he would figure out another way of finding my credit card number and using it even after I had canceled card after card after card. And he spent a lot of time following on YouTube, following a lot of the professional gamers who were teaching him the tips and tricks and tactics on how to circumvent parental controls and how to steal from your parents without their knowledge.
And what were there particular platforms he was into?
Yeah, he was on Instagram and he was on YouTube quite a bit.
None of these platforms had then, or probably not today, had any parental controls on them, right?
No, not back then at all.
Right.
No.
So what happened? So there was everything you described are the classic signs of addiction.
Right.
That there is this behavior, there's a pattern of behavior. The behavior is causing someone to do things that are illegal or dangerous, using credit cards inappropriately, right, and that kind of thing. So those are all the classic signs of addiction. How did the downward slide continue?
Well, when he started the stealing from us, we knew that we were up against something that we had no experience dealing with our other children, our other boys. And so we started getting him the mental health supports that he needed to try to work through this as a family. And David was a smart kid, and he knew that there was something wrong with his behavior. I mean, he knew he was loved so much in this family, and he could not control himself. He got anxious and depressed. And it was at that period of time that he became the target of cyberbullying by a group of classmates at his school, where they were targeting him over his mental health, over his looks. They were threatening him, telling and harassing him for months, telling him he should never go back to school. They were telling him, put him in a coffin, put him in a body bag. They said they said David Molak should never go back to school. And this went on for several months, and it moved from platform to platform, even to the point to where we moved David from his school to try to get him away from his perpetrators. But what we didn't understand at the time is that cyberbullying doesn't require geographic proximity, and it followed him to his new school. And the addiction caused the depression and the anxiety. And when the cyberbullying occurred, it was so damaging to him because he had this persona of who he thought he was online. And that cyberbullying just crushed him. And he thought he had no hope. He thought we could not make it stop. We were trying everything that we possibly could to make it stop. Even his classmates that knew it was occurring were trying to make it stop. We're trying to block it and get the perpetrators to stop doing it. And it was, it was after Christmas break, and it was the night before he was supposed to go back to school, to his new school, that he did not understand why he was the one that had to move schools to get away from the perpetrators, because he hadn't done anything wrong. And it was the final match on a huge bonfire that just exploded in our home, and David lost hope.
I'm very sorry for that. And, you're going back to the 1990s, and we've heard about cyberbullying, and we know a thing or two about cyberbullying because it was actually McGruff the crime dog who first used the term to describe things that happened to David. And part of it is the child feels like there is no escape, and that is the danger. And you compound that with a series of algorithms, with a series of geolocators, in other things that you've already had a certain pattern of addiction developed because of the feeds of the platforms, then it's compounded. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, yeah, 100% accurate. The cyberbullying was occurring 24/7. David could not get away from it, even though when we found out about it, it happened on Instagram. We took the platform away from him, but it didn't stop the cyberbullying from still occurring, even though David did not have Instagram any longer. And what kids would do is they would take screenshots of it and send that to him through regular text. And, it was reported. It ended up going viral. There were hundreds and thousands of comments on this one particular Instagram account where they were tormenting him. And there were people that David didn't even know that were chiming in. And at that time, David's profile was private, but a lot of the other students that were on there, they had public Instagram accounts. And so as they were sharing it and as they were commenting on it, it went out into the virtual world where all of these other people were seeing it happen. And as you said, the algorithm was picking up on the drama and the emojis and the hate that was happening to him on there. And it was feeding other people's feeds just to get more engagement and keep kids engaged on their platform.
Right. So sadly, what you're describing is not an uncommon story, which is the danger of it. It really, so part of the danger is it's very difficult to escape. And I want to point that out to our listeners and viewers. And if you're just joining us for the first time, please click like and subscribe because we're putting out important information every Thursday. But what happens is through social media, it's creating an ecosystem of unsafe communities. And it's very hard. You know, you took great lengths. You switched schools. He got off Instagram, yet that you couldn't escape that online ecosystem. And David, unfortunately, was part of it. And, you know, I've heard a lot of people, especially social media companies, look for ways to say it's not their problem, it's not their fault. One thing is for certain, you don't have David. It's inappropriate for anybody to blame David. He was a victim. And in that, I want to get to some of the positive things you've done over the last several years, which there are many, both in Texas and nationally. You know, one thing, we have different parents on each week who tell us a story. I'm always fascinated that, and everybody has encountered loss in their lives. I can't imagine the loss of a child. And to wake up the next day and the days after and feel a greater calling. Tell us a little bit, was there a point in time after you lost David where you said, gosh darn it, I need to do something?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, it took me several months to be able to get out of bed every day. It was living through a nightmare, a fog. I felt like at any moment I was going to wake up and it was all just going to be this terrible nightmare. And I just could not imagine that this was the life that I was going to have to live without one of my children that I adored and had devoted my, 16 years of my life to him. And he was just my precious one, my precious baby. After about 6 months, we knew, because we had so many other families reach out to us whose children had experienced similar situations, looking for support and help. And we knew we lived in a community where people were reaching out and saying, we want to help. What can we do? We're so afraid of what social media is going to do to our children when they get older. A lot of young families were coming alongside us and wanted to be part of a solution. And, Texas only meets every other year for about 5 months to do legislative work. We don't pass a lot of laws in Texas in that short period of time, but we were in the off session, out of session. So it gave us plenty of time to start working on what could we do, what tools were missing in cyberbullying situations where we could help other families so that they did not have to walk in our same shoes. So we knew how the school was hand strangled, right, for not being able to address some of the situation that was occurring to David because it happened outside of school hours. And a lot of the perpetrators' families, even when the school was investigating and they wanted to take action, those families said, you don't have jurisdiction over this because it happened outside of school hours, not on school property. So we knew that there was something really wrong with that because it really impacted David's educational opportunities, not only for when he was in school dealing with it for those 3 months, but the fact that we had to move him out of the school in order to get away from those perpetrators. So we knew that there were tools that were missing in the education code. We also knew that we needed a better harassment code, a better penal code in Texas, because at the time it talked about fax machines and pagers, and it did not even address cell phones and social media and all of the updates to technology. And so we wanted to update our penal code, which we did, and we were actually able to get an increased penalty for certain cyberbullying situations. And we also created an avenue for parents to be able to get an injunction against a cyberbully and enjoin the cyberbully's parents, requiring them to make sure that their child stops that behavior. And if they don't, then a judge can enforce higher consequences, stronger consequences against that child as well as their parents in those particular situations. So being able to provide those tools was something that we really wanted to do so that kids would feel protected, both at school and have avenues to be able to address it should it happen in the future.
Let's talk about local law enforcement for a little bit. And I'm assuming from some of the things you've already talked about was after you lost David that you did contact the San Antonio police, right?
Yeah, well, we lived in a little subdivision area
outside of San Antonio.
And, back then, the laws didn't support it.
Right. Did the police feel like their hands were tied, or what was their reaction?
Yeah, their hands were tied, and they felt like, some of the kids that were in there, you have to prove intent and intent to harm. And that's really difficult in those particular situations. What they were able to do was, knock and talks, knock on the door and talk to the parents and say, this is what your child is doing. In those particular situations, it usually goes underground, and you start seeing these anonymous usernames pop up, or anonymous apps are popping up that are very, very difficult to trace. Back then, it was we could not find a law enforcement group or person that would be able to dive into that world. For them, they felt like, boys will be boys, and kids are just mean, is what we heard.
So you became your own crime dog.
Yes, we tried to. Yeah.
Well, that's good, because I like to say McGruff is not drawn with a cape and a superhero. McGruff's job is to get people engaged. It takes a community. It's community action that will force change, whether it's legislatively, whether it's by the companies. One thing that has puzzled me is these algorithms. They're all part of a product manufactured by a company. And I was always taught and always believed that, there's responsibility in this world, and everyone has responsibility. You have personal responsibility, you have community responsibilities. There's also such a thing as corporate responsibility. Did you reach out to Meta?
Yes, we did. And so when the cyberbullying was occurring, the kids actually reported it on the platforms, and they got no response back. And so that's why it was left up for so long. And, that was really difficult for those young people. And even some of them went to their parents and showed their parents the Instagram of what was happening to David. And they said, look what they're doing to David. And, their parents said, don't get involved because it might turn on you. And after David died, those kids and those parents came to us weeping in just total sorrow and regret that they did not do more to try to help David in that particular situation. And we, of course, told them it wasn't their fault. Now we know we can't just be bystanders. We have to be able to intervene when somebody is being harmed, either, in person or online. After David died, and we personally reached out to Facebook and Meta and wanted to engage them in solutions and wanted to bring them to the table, and they had no interest in working with us. We had some provisions in David's law that would hold them responsible for turning over anonymous user identification of when a minor was being harmed online. And they did everything they could to fight us, and those provisions got pulled out of David's law. And that is when I vowed that I was going to continue on this advocacy path to make sure that they were held accountable for the harms that they're perpetuating on their site. Because reporting features are not, ideal, and they don't work. And just the fact that they have these design features that they're allowing, their platforms to harm children.
And so let me ask, because I assume the answer to this question is no. You're not a professional lobbyist, correct?
That's correct. That's
So
the only
this
thing
was,
I ever did before this work was vote. So,
and you're talking about Texas, as you pointed out, probably one of the most difficult states to get any law passed in because they just don't meet,
right. Yeah.
among other things. So I think that's both a statement to your strength, your perseverance, and your will. And I also think it's a sign of inspiration for those who are listening to know, you're really not powerless. You can overcome the millions of dollars a company like Meta will spend on lobbyists and in all of that, because what you're asking for, it sounds pretty basic. It's almost like if you make the equation to the early days of the automobile industry before there were seatbelts and airbags, you're pretty much just asking for seatbelts and airbags.
Right.
You're not saying, Meta, you should be out of business. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So sounds like a very reasonable request. And I suspect that in Texas, of all states, where it is very hard to get a bill passed, the reason it passed was because the things you were asking for are so reasonable.
I think so. We would go to Austin. My husband and I would take turns every week and tell David's story and talk about the provisions that we felt were needed in these particular situations. And we were, it was nothing short of a miracle that we got David's Law passed in the very first session that we actually worked on it. We didn't get like I said, we didn't get everything
Sure.
we wanted. The social media companies lobbied against. We had to pull those provisions out in order to get what we got. We've gone back several sessions since 2017 and passed additional measures to build up David's Law to make sure that there's more prevention tools in place to prevent these serious harms in Texas.
Good for you, and congratulations on what you've already been able to accomplish. You mentioned other parents reaching out to you. How do they hear? I mean, is there a network out there? We work with a variety of parents. We're the National Crime Prevention Council, so people know us. They call us. They say, "Hey, what can you do? What can you do to help?" And we do all we can. Including we work very closely with the state attorneys general in all 50 states, the U.S. Attorney General, Congress, and others. And the one thing I can assure you and other families, McGruff, the crime dog, has your back on this and always will. But I've run into other families who know you and said, "Oh, you should have Maurine on your podcast." So tell us a little bit about how this sort of impromptu network evolved.
Well, I think the success that we had in Texas really set us. We had a lot of media coverage, and people would say that the bill that we passed in Texas was the strongest cyberbullying legislation that was passed. And unfortunately, there were so many other tragedies, much like David's, where kids died by suicide after serious cyberbullying and tormenting. And much like me, just out of our grief, we're just trying to find somebody else that might understand what we were going through. I had another parent who reached out to me, and I built a relationship with her, and she invited me to join the online harms prevention work group, which is part of Fair Play. And I've been a part of that. Started that in 2022. And in that group, I met parents from all over the United States whose children had died from various online harms, from the choking challenge, from their child had purchased, just like you were saying, Amy Neville, that you just were talking about, whose child Alex died after purchasing a counterfeit pill on Snapchat and died from a fentanyl overdose. and parents whose children have died by suicide after a sextortion scheme impacted them one night. Children whose mental health, much like David, had been harmed because of pro-suicide content that had been fed to them through the algorithms. And so meeting all of these families, that we had something in common, and we would be able to get together and go to DC and tell our stories to Congress in hopes that we would be able to pass some meaningful legislation, specifically the Kids Online Safety Act. And we started working on that in 2022.
And last year it did pass the Senate. One of your senators, Senator Ted Cruz, has been a strong supporter of that, and others. Have you met with Senator Cruz? I'm guessing he knows your story well.
Yes, he does. I've met with him a few times,
Good.
and his staff many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Senator Cornyn. They've both been very supportive. I've been very blessed that they are on the right side of this.
And the vote in the Senate was lopsided. I think it was 92-4 or something.
91-3.
91, yeah. And in this day and age of very partisan politics, that is just simply unheard of. Mm-hmm. But yet it didn't make its way to the president's desk because it just stalled in the House.
Yeah.
And part of that is, we see the public hearings, we get the votes, we watch the news on television, and we see when something happens. What we don't see is what happens when they're not meeting, when they're not voting, and that is a lot of deals, a lot of lobbying, and a lot of money being thrown around. You were actually at that very infamous hearing in which the CEOs of the major social media companies, including Meta's CEO, Zuckerberg, and he stood up to that hearing room. And for those who may remember it, or I'll try to describe the scene, and you were there, but somewhere in the middle of the hearing, he stood up and he turned around, and instead of looking at the senators, he looked at the parents, many of whom were sitting there and holding up photos of the child they lost. It was very emotional, and he apologized to the families. In that moment, and you were in the room, what was running through your mind?
Well, I was probably about 20 feet directly behind Mark Zuckerberg, and his apology was a flat apology. I don't even consider it apology. He didn't take any responsibility whatsoever. And basically, earlier in the morning, he had pretty much put it back on the parents and were blaming the parents, and said that there was no correlation between his platform design and any kind of mental health. That the research wasn't showing that, which is not true. You could all hear his groan when he said that. Mm-hmm. But after that apology, it just got so quiet, in the room. I mean, no one was impressed. No one was thankful for that. It was just a very, very shallow apology. But it just said, he was sorry for what we had experienced, and that they would do better. And that was a year and a half ago.
Right. And to put it in some sort of context, we're not talking dozens of children. We're not talking hundreds of children. We're talking thousands of children. And some may recall back in the 1980s, or you may have heard of this, there was a crisis with Tylenol. Someone had tampered in one of the manufacturing plants and slipped some arsenic into some of the Tylenol bottles. And this is when I talk about corporate responsibility, this is an example of corporate responsibility. Johnson & Johnson, McNeil Consumer Products, the maker of Tylenol, didn't do this. It was some criminal who did it. Their response was not our problem. Their response was they voluntarily issued a national recall, stopped the production lines until they figured out what happened, and then they figured it out. And all those safety seals that you get on any medicine, vitamin, or any other product that you put into your body has a safety seal as a result. They lost business.
Yeah.
They rebounded. It took them years, and they probably were in a stronger business position because they were then seen as the ones who really cared and fixed something. And it puzzles me why someone like Zuckerberg, where, yes, if they shut down Instagram for a month and said, hey, we're going to shut this down, yeah, they would lose some money. There's no doubt about that. But if they came up with a solution that other companies would then model, they would forever be seen as the leader and people would trust them. Is that ever, if you've ever wondered going to sleep, hey, Zuckerberg, you're one of the richest people in the world. You could lose a little money. Why don't you make it safer?
Yeah, well, we've been asking that question, and we say, why can't you make it safer for kids? And we have a duty to protect future generations, and he wouldn't have to shut it down, Paul. He could just flip a switch. I mean, we've heard from so many whistleblowers on what he could do to make his platforms safer, and the fact that he knows that certain design features are harming kids, and how girls especially are harmed and contacted by sexual predators and adults that they don't want to be contacted by, and receive sexual advances online. And he's very well aware of those harms and has chosen to turn a blind eye. And it's all about the bottom line and his shareholders. And, the design model that is, we need to addict kids so that they become a user for life. And the way that we do that is through our design features that cause, compulsive use, lots of drama on there, because they know how they have these most brilliant people that work for them and that know about behavioral, addiction, and they're designing their products for addiction for kids. And until Congress forces them to take some responsibility and build their platforms safer for kids and give parents more safeguards, and safety by default is what we say, is that, so parents don't have to figure out, or kids don't have to figure out how to make those platforms safer. They're on by default the minute that you download that app. And then also just making sure that there's some transparency there, because the public deserves to know what is happening on those platforms and how kids
absolutely
are harmed.
That to inform people,
right?
Something as basic and straightforward as that is something they're resisting. Now, also, I have to add, as a crime expert, what you just described as a business model to addict people so you have a customer for life is the same business model for a drug cartel. The reason why drug cartels are including fentanyl as a substance in their fake pills, which is a whole new market line that they've opened up, which are largely sold online. 8 out of 10 pills sold online are traced back to a social media interaction.
Right.
And if you include the cloaking apps like Signal and other things, that number goes up.
Right.
So that's the model. And yet it's no, don't touch it is the response. And your response to that is, let's ask for some accountability, which again sounds very reasonable. Let's get into to what's in COSA and some of the details. So it is the Kids Online Safety Act. It has been endorsed by a large number of organizations, including the National Crime Prevention Council, parents, average citizens, and others. It has not been endorsed by Meta and the companies affected. Right. In fact, they're doing all they can to oppose it. So tell us a little bit about what's in the bill.
Yeah. So, what's really important is the duty of care. And that actually requires the social media platforms to design their platforms so that they're addressing and things like drug dealers online, the physical harms that we know in the real world, being able to make sure that kids are not connected with drug dealers or connected with sextortionists. And also, we're talking about cyberbullying, right? So the harassment online, so that they're able to put some provisions in there to mitigate those design features that are feeding those kids that drama that they saw when David was experiencing it, as well as some safety by default, right? On the highest protective settings for kids, and then giving parents additional tools to be able to help their child on their online in their online life. It's really, really difficult for parents to figure out where all of the safeguards are on each of these different platforms that kids are on. And it's like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as you figure out one platform, 5 more pop up, and kids are just so much more savvy about it than parents are. And it's not a fair fight for parents to say, you have to go in and you have to figure out how all of these platforms work in order to keep your child safe on this platform.
Right.
So, so those safeguards are in there. Real reporting requirements. So like in the situation where David's cyberbullying was reported, that there's a real person or a real process in place to where they're going to get a meaningful response back in those situations. There's also some transparency, some third-party independent audits that are required in COSA. And like you mentioned earlier, we have a Senate version that passed 91-3 last year. We're working on the text right now in the House. We're waiting for that to be released. The Senate version was reintroduced just last month. And we're hoping that we're going to see a House version here July before the August recess. We feel confident that we're going to be able to see that come out. And we're just asking for the strongest version of COSA to pass, because we know that, kids are being harmed. And the longer that we wait, the more kids are being harmed. And so we've got to be able to pass something and get it to President Trump's desk.
Good. And I want to quickly address some of the rumors of some things, because I'm not sure some of these things, and I don't think they are in the bill. It won't add to the deficit. Is that correct? There's not money involved.
There's no money involved.
It's not going to raise anybody's taxes.
No.
It is not going to let the president supersede the First Amendment. Is that, or any other government official? Is that?
That is correct.
That is correct. The content that you and I or anybody else post is not, no one is going to be poking around and getting into our hard drives or our cloud and know what we're writing. Is that correct? That is correct. That is correct. Yet they still oppose it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is right. So go ahead and try to figure that out. So, they hide behind something which is called, the social media companies, called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is basically, it says the companies are not responsible for the content posted. All that COSA does is, it says, it just opens it up where if those companies have done something callously, where they have not shown a duty to care to their own customers, that it allows someone like you or someone else to go to court and say, hey, they made a mistake. They need to fix it somehow. They need to rectify it. They need to compensate the families for their injuries, as well as change the platform. Because one of the reasons why a lot of people are saying the courts have to be the mechanism, and you pointed this out, there was a law written, but that in Texas, and that law, you were still using dial-up and fax machines and things like that. So it's very hard for Congress, and I think the last time Congress significantly looked at legislation around regulating the internet was 20 years ago. It's a much different world. And, as you pointed out, Texas only meets every other year. And so it's very difficult for laws to keep up with technology and the pace of technology. And that's a good thing. Technology is good. But it also shows that, we need something a little quicker. And sometimes, even though a court is not lightning quick, you can go to the courthouse the day after something happens and start the process rolling. You can't do that in Congress. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, one thing about COSA is that, the duty of care is focused on the design features. It's not a content bill, so it's not, doesn't address anything in the First Amendment. It doesn't address any content whatsoever. And the FTC has the authority to enforce that duty of care. So that's just really important for the folks out there. It's another myth that we often hear about. It's a great talking point for big tech to spread those rumors. And it's been very difficult for the parents who've been out there advocating for it, walking those same halls as those lobbyists who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars on the backs of American families. And that's what we're asking Congress to do, is to stand with America's families, give parents tools, put them in the driver's seat so that they can protect their kids online.
Well, that is great. And Maurine, again, our deepest sympathies to you and your family and the community. As you pointed out, there were classmates, friends, aunts, uncles, cousins, acquaintances, the 911 operator who had to take that call, the police. The number of people who are impacted is just enormous. And again, congratulations for the courage and determination and the effectiveness. Like I said, we'll always have your back. You have a place to turn to. And for our listeners out there, again, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because we're going to bring you these stories, not because, the story in itself is important, but there is a greater purpose, and there's a greater purpose for you, the listener, to get involved into that. We'll have follow-up information about David's story and some of the resources that you've made available, David's Law and COSA, and action that you, the listener, can take and need to take, because that's the only way we're going to get real change. So again, I'm Paul DelPonte on behalf of the National Crime Prevention Council and McGruff the Crime Dog. We thank Maurine. We thank you for listening and wish you all the best and all safety. Thank you for joining.
It's an easy way to take a bite out of crime.